Welcome to the Shared Practices podcast. If you're listening to this episode, we're going to introduce you to the world of shared practices. And if you already know who we are, great. Ironically, so much changes that you might not realize everything that's happened in the last months, years. And we want to take you through the journey that we've been through so that you know, like, hey, are these guys worth listening to for me? And what we can do for you. So first off, I'm Dr. Richard Lowe. I founded this podcast about 4 years ago, 2016, as a young Army dentist who had no clue how to run a dental practice, buy a dental practice. And I wanted to create the resource that I didn't have at the time. I wanted to help other people figure out, hey, is practice ownership worth it for me? And then if so, how do I start or buy a dental practice and then actually run it? And somewhere along the line, we brought on Dr. George Hariri, who is on the line. Welcome, George. How's it going?
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's if you go back. So the funny thing is about our show is that people listen to it in season chronology. Like sometimes somebody will reach out to me and say, "Hey, I'm on season 2," and well, we're on season 6. So season 2, episode 9, you were introduced to a third-year dental student. That's me, and I joined Richard at Shared Practices as his partner. And at the time, I was just a dental student obsessed with practice management. And now I'm a dentist obsessed with practice management. So not much has changed, but at the same time, everything's changed.
Should we tell them a little bit more of that story of bringing you on?
Yeah, we should.
Okay, so at that point, I was like, a season into this podcast, really loved it. But I was also a resident in the Army's 2-year AEGD program they have at Fort Hood. And there was a lot of time constraints. I was a young father, 2 young kids. And marriage was kind of on the rocks because I had overcommitted myself and basically said, hey, hun, I know that I'm super busy at this residency and I'm gone all the time. But when I come home, I'm going to disappear into the closet and record audio with strangers on the internet. That for whatever reason, that didn't fly well. And she came around to the point where she was like, you know what? This isn't working. I need you to choose 2 of the 3. You've got family, podcast, and residency. Choose 2. And to the point where she brought my suitcase, packed it, put it in the trunk of my car during lecture in residency, and then texted me like, hey, go find a hotel room and figure out your priorities and get caught up on residency crap. And I don't want you to come home and be stressed. I don't want to feel guilty for demanding your time and attention. And in retrospect, it was the appropriate thing for her to do. Like, stuff was out of balance. And so I had some friends that I was in communication with. George was one of them. I had met him online via some Dental Town acquaintances back in the day. And I let them know, like, guys, I might have to kill this podcast. I want to stay married. I might drop out of residency. I think this podcast has the potential to be life-changing for me and for others. And George, you stepped up to the plate. What was your perspective on this?
Yeah, so I had a 2-month-old baby, and I spent my whole 3rd year of dental school. I was one of the top producing D3s in clinic, and I did that to get days off. And I used all of those days off after my son was born. So I was sitting at home with a 6-week-old baby, bored out of my mind, and because he sleeps all day, but I was there to take care of him. Right. And then Richard was like, well, I need some help with this podcast. And I was like, well, yes. Let's do this. And I was also, I had obsessed with practice management all throughout dental school. And I was starting to really look for something to put that energy into. We call it angst, right? You had the angst. That's why you started the show. And I had the angst, and I wanted to invest in something and have somewhere to put that energy. And so, yeah, I mean, I thought I did not think I wanted to be on air. I wanted to be the guy behind the scenes. I did not want to be on the mic. And I've come to love podcasting. And talking is my favorite part of it. And, now we have a second show called Dental Friends with Benefits that I enjoy doing as well.
Yeah, you really have done a 180 on your, you still don't listen to podcasts, but you're now a phenomenal podcaster. So you get props there. So we should probably introduce Matt somewhere in here. I want to know.
So I'm getting there. So let me go ahead and take it from here. And so, okay. So anyway, this was March, that was May of 17. So May of 2017, I came on. And for about 2 years, it was Richard and I. And we were just trying to grow the podcast, and we kind of did some online course stuff that we did with our audience, but we didn't really do anything our course was great. It was life-changing to those who took it and followed it. But It wasn't until we had met Matt, and Matt was one of many of our listeners who listened to everything we had said, followed the recipe we put out there, bought a practice, and was doing incredibly well for himself financially. And he was taking a life coaching program, and he wanted to give back to dentists by coaching and helping them do the things that he did that we helped him do. And so he reached out to us to join our company. And that's when we brought on our third partner, our COO today, Matt Garino.
Wow. Thanks for that, guys. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Garino. So I am a listener from the start. Like Richard and George's words were pretty much gospel in my life. And I followed the exact recipe to get into practice ownership and once in there to succeed and kind of owe everything I have to them. So it was, the thrill of a lifetime to come on as a partner and help build, the offerings we have today with coaching and mastermind and truly impact a lot of young dentists' lives. And we're crazy excited about everything we're building here. So thrilled to be here, thrilled to be talking to some new people maybe don't know about us, which is really exciting. We have a really core group of loyal listeners. So being exposed to other dentists is always something we look forward to and welcome. So thank you.
And so are we going to introduce the last host on this recording?
Yeah, I think we should. I think we
Matt,
can't do.
Can we go ahead and do an introduction for our fourth guest?
Yeah, you got it.
Matt.
Okay. So our fourth guest, I thought you were taking, I'll take it. We have our director of pre-owner mastermind and our host of our Wednesday show, The Pursuit of Ownership, current dental student, Tyler Tolbert.
Hey, Matt, thanks for bringing me in reluctantly. I kind of got skipped over in the chronology of things there.
Yeah,
but,
I gotta go back. Matt, that introduction for Tyler did not do any, this 10% justice.
No service to me whatsoever.
So that's why I said you got it.
So actually, Tyler came on before Matt. On air, Matt came on first, but it was in my D4 year. I was starting to be on the podcast. I'd been on the podcast for about 6 months, and I was helping people do evals all the time. And by evals, it means somebody's looking to buy a practice and they need some help looking at the practice's financials. Is this a good practice for me? Something we talk about a lot on our show. And I was getting requests a lot from listeners, and it was starting to get overwhelming, and I needed some help. And Ty Dalla, as he says in his description, Tyler, reached out to me, and he wanted to be a part of, I don't even know why he reached out to me. I think he had responded to an auto email that went out. And I remember reading the email and being super impressed with him as a first-year dental student. And so I said, I'm a fourth-year dental student. I clearly have a lot of experience to teach you. So, come under my wing and let me mentor you for the next 3 years while you're in dental school. And he had just started dental school. And so I reached out to Tyler, and then, a lot of roles in between then and now. Now he leads our Wednesday segment. So we have a Monday segment of our show, which is Richard's segment. And that's what started the whole thing. That was the seasons chronologies. We have seasons 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And Richard will talk about that in a second. And then Matt and I run a segment called Practice Underwater, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then Tyler runs our Wednesday segment, which is The Pursuit of Ownership. So Tyler, welcome to the show. Take it away.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. So, it's funny hearing Matt talk about listening to yours and Richard's words as gospel. I think I was definitely under the spell as well, despite the fact that, you'd only been in for about 6 months and, we're just a D4 yourself. Somehow I just got totally hypnotized by that, and I was willing to do a whole lot of stuff for free. So, been doing that for quite some time. But yeah, no, it was funny, being a D1, going through helping, dentists evaluate practices and make decisions on, what practice they were going to buy into. And I mean, we've seen how that's been such a life-changing thing for people. Has been a real honor for me, and I've certainly learned a lot. And there's a lot between then and now, but I'm super happy to have taken up the mantle of, the dental student teaching dentists how to purchase practices. And I'm really proud and happy to do it. I have a co-host in my segment as well, Peyton Keller, who's kind of being groomed as my successor. And we're both kind of the last remaining dental students in this tribe here. But it's a great team to be a part of. So I'm happy to be here.
That's awesome. Can I give the overarching hypothesis for shared practices? So we talked about angst driving a lot of our personal motivation to learn practice management, to learn how to be good practice owners, to learn how to buy the right dental practice. But I think for a lot of people, a common starting point for that angst is student loans. And whether or not that endpoint kind of matters, at the very beginning, you're in dental school, you're looking at 400, 500, NYU students are now looking at over $700,000 of student loans, all in cost, which is the funniest thing. NYU has taken down the full estimates with like the cost of living stuff. I think they're embarrassed by it on their website. Like you don't get the full breakdown on the website. You have to actually sign up and go to NYU to then get the sticker shock of the $700K.
You got to collect the secondary application fee first.
Yes, exactly. And so this like angst of holy crap, this is a lot of debt. Am I ever going to get out of this? Is practice ownership even on the table for me? Is it worth it? Corporates coming in and telling us that like, hey, you can't own a dental practice because you have too much debt. It's too competitive. Practice ownership is dead. That's just like not what you do in dentistry anymore. I think that's a very common starting point for this angst from a lot of us. And really puts a very fine point on how serious people are taking practice ownership, because it's like getting out from under that debt as an associate can be really hard to do, especially when those numbers get higher, the interest levels get higher. Whereas ownership, the hypothesis of our show is that ownership is the tool and the vehicle for financial independence and success, paying down those student loans, living the lifestyle that you want to live, and whether or not you even choose to pay down those student loans once you've got that income and control over your life and your financial future is a whole different issue. But we have consistently been trying to answer the question, okay, is practice ownership right for me? That was season 1. How do I prepare for it? And then if it is, how do I not screw it up? Because there is some ways to royally screw this up. You can buy the wrong practice. You can do a crappy startup. And so like practice ownership, like at the same time that we definitely think it's the answer for the right group of people, it's also not this like automatic get out of jail free card. You have to do it right. You have to get into it the right way. And then you have to be a business owner and a leader in a practice. And there's so many ways to just kind of get buried by that. And so now that we've had people that have bought practices because of our podcast, who've started practices kind of all along the way with us, we have this obligation, we feel like, to continue to help these people succeed. And so what started off as a podcast of like, hey, let's interview people who are in the middle of this journey. We're going on this journey together. All of us other than Tyler now have had a wide variety of ownership experiences. And we now have solutions to all of these problems all along the way, and results. And so I've got a friend who, he was a roommate of mine freshman year of undergrad. And before either of us knew we were going into dentistry, he ended up listening to our podcast as it was kind of coming out, took us on our word and bought a dental practice. And he texted me after his first year of ownership, and he said, I paid more in taxes last year than I made as an associate the previous year. So if you're paying that much taxes, you're making a whole lot of money.
That's awesome.
He then texted me just recently. He said, I am now officially a millionaire because of what you guys have done at Shared Practices. And so he is making big moves, and he bought a healthy bread and butter practice. He's not doing anything crazy, but he bought the right practice and he's done really well with it. So that's the prototype of, hey, this is possible. And if you want help at any point along this journey, we want to be here for you, whether that's free help via the podcast and our Facebook group, or that's more customized hand-holding helpfulness, community, mastermind, coaching, all of the above. We now have the ability to help people at any point in their journey. And a lot of that has been George, Matt, and Tyler building all of this while I'm still in the Army. I'm not out of the Army for another 4 months or 3 months, I think now. April 7th, 2021. I started this podcast knowing I had 5 more years in the Army. And by the end of it, I was like, hey, if no one's listening and we haven't gotten any traction, we'll just shut it down at that point and I'll move on.
So Richard, you touched on 2 things. So you said, if no one's listening, what happened to the podcast over the last 4.5 years?
I think because we said, hey, we're going to help young dentists and ignore all of the older dentists who already have a practice and think they know exactly how to run a practice. We've been incredibly blessed to help people, and the reviews and the growth have reflected that. So we've got well over 400 5-star reviews in iTunes, which makes us the #1 rated dental podcast in iTunes out of over 70, 80 plus dental podcasts. We've had 1.2 million downloads. And we've got an amazing community of people on Facebook that are practice ownership oriented, positive, supportive. Our Facebook group has never really turned into a dumpster fire, like in all our years of having a Facebook group, which is pretty incredible. So we've had growth, and we've had amazing people tune in and contribute and share their experiences and support other people. And it's been incredible to see.
So I want to add one thing to what Richard had said. He talked about his college friend, and I won't say his name, but I know exactly who you're talking about, obviously. And, that you might listen to that and say, like, wow, they're showing their best, like, that's like their superstar. We want that to be average. That's average in our world. And so our slogan, redefining average, means we're taking what you might think is like an amazing result, and we're making it ordinary, and everyone in our ecosystem that's what we expect, and that's what they get. And that's why we feel like we're doing something special in this industry, because we're taking results that people have called ridiculous, unheard of, whatever, and we're making them ordinary. And if you look at Richard, I'm going to talk about you for a minute, and then I'll talk about Matt, and then I'll talk about me. If you look at what Richard has accomplished in the military. So Richard, multiple practice owner in the military, Richard, how many did you buy in the military?
So I have bought 3 with partners who did the majority of the work, but it felt very impossible at the time to buy even one while I was still in the Army. I fully did not expect to buy 3 dental practices with still 2 years left on my Army commitment.
So we have a multi-practice owner in the military starting a podcast with over 1 million downloads in over 100 countries. That's a one in a how many military dentists have ever existed person that we have in Richard Lowe. And then you have Matt Garino, who listens to what we did and bought a practice in New York. And we have a term on our show. It's called Matt Garino money. And I won't tell you how much it is, but we talk about it on the show. And it signifies that as a solo dentist in Matt's practice in New York, he accomplished an income level that, so we talked about how much Todd paid taxes. Owner dentists make less than Matt paid in taxes.
I have multiple freshman roommates that ended up becoming dentists and have followed our advice.
I paid over 3 times what I made as an associate in taxes.
Yeah, so Matt worked as an associate and then paid over 3 times that in taxes as a solo dentist. We call that making Matt Garino money. The percentile of that before he turned 30, that's super rare. And for myself, I graduated dental school and I bought a practice doing over $1 million, which as a new grad, to buy a practice of that size is, very rare. And then to have grown it 2.5 times in 2 years is also very rare. And so you have 3 people that have done the thing that we talk about doing all the time to a level that is above what we even consider average. And so average in our world is superb everywhere else, but in our world it's average. And I want to, we're not people that are just saying stuff. We're people that are doing it too.
Well, Tyler, I want to hear your perspective on this. The funny thing is that because we can surround ourselves with people like this, sometimes we forget that most of people in dental school just aren't even thinking about this kind of stuff. And you live in these 2 different worlds. You live in this world of us always talking, thinking, having so many perspectives, so much data that we can use to make these decisions and learn from our people. And then you flip over and you talk with some of your classmates who just haven't really thought about practice ownership yet at all. What's that like?
I lead a vicarious life, Richard. I still exist in that ecosystem that represents a lot of dogma that I think we kind of unravel on the show. And so it can be difficult sometimes, maintaining both worlds simultaneously. And I can't wait for my story to emerge as I get out of school and have my own thing to talk about. But it is difficult at times, but at the same time, it creates that contrast, and it reminds me of just how fortunate I am to be among you guys and to be working with you and to be working towards the cause that we are. I think one thing you were touching on when you were introducing the show, and I'm sure the audience is picking up as well, is that a lot of these stories are emerging from very young people. And, I think one really important myth that we've kind of broken down is that, you need to have a certain number, of years of experience as an associate, just learning things by diffusion in order to be ready for ownership. We hear that all the time. People just don't think they're ready. And I think we've really done a lot of work to kind of diffuse that and show that it's not, it's not just a certain amount of time that like you're cooking something that someone just gets ready to be an owner. It's a decision, and it's a lifestyle. It's intentionality, and that's what we're all about. And we welcome that at any stage of someone's career. If they come at us right before they're starting dental school or D1, they say, "Hey, I'm really intent on practice ownership," and we say, "Okay, well, we're starting now." And people decide to be pre-owners, as soon as they're ready. I think that's something that's really transformative about the show. And, we have, we're working on developing pathways for just about any listener. So
I want to expand on that because, obviously we're a bunch of young guys and, you think of like a dentist who's older looking at us as these kids. I'm 27, Matt's 31. Richard, are you 33?
34
now,
weird.
Our senior member is a prime 34 years old. And, he very much is the father of the group, making sure the rest of us behave and we don't. But, nonetheless, I think it's symbolic of our audience. Our audience is 2015 grads and younger. And it's not because we don't want anyone else. It's just those are the people that they look at us as peers and they say, wow, if they could do it at my age, then I can do it too. And, at this point, we've now identified that we have dental students listening, we have associate dentists listening, and we have owner dentists listening. And so our evolution from guys with a podcast to, a company that can help these people is that we now are able to offer solutions for every single segment of our audience. Whether you're a dental student, an associate dentist, or an owner dentist, we all have the same goal. And that's to make the most out of our lives through practice ownership. And we have a way for each of those people to go along that path with us. And that's something I'm really proud of, is that we've gone from just waiting for them to become owners to help them to helping them wherever they are at whatever price point they can afford.
And while you're talking there, I thought of a metaphor that I think perfectly describes our audience. So if you all have seen the movie Social Network, there's a scene where Eduardo Saverin, who's the co-founder of Facebook, he goes in to sign some papers for some like restructuring of the company. And the lawyer's going through like technical terms and he knows all of it. And the guy says, that's why I love working with business owners. And I thought about like, now that we've coached dozens of dentists, helped run their practices in our coaching department, we know when that client is a Share Praxis listener, because of how advanced they are. They already know all the terms, that it's so much easier to get through them and work on higher level things than if someone comes to us and just hasn't consumed any of our content.
So I want to take a minute and go through, if you've never listened to our podcast, and it's overwhelming. There's over 300 episodes. Is there 300 episodes, Richard?
Yeah, we've broken 300. Yeah.
Over 300 episodes, which they're hour long each. Like, this is a lot of content. I don't care how much you 2X it. It's going to take a while. And so, let's go through every season and everything we have. And then you can pick, it's great because wherever you're at in your life, whatever's relevant to your journey is where you should start. If you're already a practice owner, seasons 1, 2, and 3 might not appeal to you. If you don't want to work on case acceptance, then maybe not season 4. So Richard, can you go through the different seasons that we've had on our show and a little synopsis of each one so that someone listening for the first time would know where to start?
I'd love to. So season 1, I mentioned earlier, the biggest question is, we've been pumping up practice ownership, showing the financial results of it, but there's a lot of ways to be a dentist. You can be a military dentist, you can be in academia, you can have a successful career working for someone else. And knowing whether or not you want to be a practice owner is a pivotal step. And I didn't want to just assume, hey, everyone wants to be a practice owner, this is right for everyone. So there's a portion of season 1 that's dedicated to, is practice ownership right for me? And then if so, is it worth it? And I think we've showed pretty well, if you are into it, then yes, it is worth it. But some of the questions you can ask yourself to know, is it right for me? Number 1, you have to have a risk tolerance. You have to be willing to take on additional debt. Being a practice owner, you're providing not only your income, but also your team. Things like COVID definitely happen. And that's a pretty extreme case, but we made it through. But stuff's going to happen in the future. Risks have to be taken in practice ownership. So your ability to deal with risk and additional debt, your willingness to manage people. I think that's a big one for a lot of people, is dentists who get into practice ownership and aren't prepared to manage people and don't have the tools to get coaching and to become a better leader and a manager. Those are the ones who are the most miserable. So knowing, am I willing to manage people, and am I willing to get the training and support to do that? If you're not naturally good at that, you can get better at that, is another part of it. And then lastly, are you willing to learn the business side of things? So you can't stick your head in the sand and just assume my practice is going to run itself. If I just have good systems, I don't have to be a good business owner. And being a business owner is its own skill set that is not taught in dental school at all. So you have to have those three components. And then there's some other stuff like, what are your goals? What's your timeline? What career pivots do you know you're going to take? What's your spouse's situation if you're married or things like that? So there's a lot of reasons why someone wouldn't be a practice owner. And if you can't answer yes to those questions of risk, of managing people and learning the business side, then even though it might financially be worth it, then it's probably not a good fit for you. But I think that conversation, like respecting all the other ways that you can be a dentist and also some self-introspection, needs to happen first. So then once you've cleared that hurdle, then how do I prepare for ownership? So liquidity, cash on hand is going to be essential for an acquisition or a startup, either way. So rather than paying down loans, sock some cash into a bank account. Doesn't have to need to be like any sort of investment, just you need cash on hand, and you need to figure out what kind of practice you want to buy. That's the two most important things, is getting ready financially and knowing what you want. And I think we've learned since season 1, the thing that we didn't do well in season 1 is answering that question of what kind of practice do I want? Because we kind of had to try out some of these different models and realize the pros and cons and who they're suited for. And I think the default that most dentists fall into is a solo practice owner. So a dentist who is in the practice, there's no other dentist, you are producing, you're the business owner, a smaller team. That is a very straightforward way, if you buy the right practice, to make good money, possibly Matt Garino type money, as a solo practice owner without having to multiply the headaches of business ownership and of managing people. And if you're the type of person that says, I want to do dentistry until the day I die, that's probably the type of practice that you should be in. If you're a person who really, really likes the business side of things, then maybe, and you're also thinking, maybe there's a point where I'm like barely a clinical dentist. I'm there a day or two a week, and then there's a practice that runs itself. Maybe a larger single group practice would be a good model for us. So George, I'll defer to you on how you help people make that decision and recognize in themselves what kind of model they should think about.
So one thing you'll learn as you listen to our show, and I love that Richard is going through our whole journey, and if some of it's don't apply to you, just kind of hang with us. But, we missed this early on. Therefore, I missed this early on, right? I did not realize my vision was not to practice clinical dentistry. It took me doing it to find that out. And so if we could go back and amend season 1, which is ownership right for me, and season 2, which is buying a practice, the thing we really missed is vision. And I was a dental student, and I didn't realize how much I was super passionate about the dental practice management more than the actual doing of the dentistry itself. And so I walked into a practice intending to be a solo doctor like Richard had described, because I knew that was the way to make the most predictable income. And after doing it, I realized I hated it. And I ended up pivoting my practice. I have 2 full-time associates now, and I go in starting this year, at the beginning of 2021, I'm in every other week for just a couple hours managing the practice, and then I leave. And I do this, which is my passion. And so, I think the thing that I'd add is to listen to yourself. And that's one thing that the show will teach you, is how to listen to yourself and how to understand what you want and how to use that to then find the right practice, which is really season 2. So the only thing I'll add is a little warning for our audience. I want to put this in, probably should have come in earlier. If you read our iTunes reviews, you'll see this show will change your life. And you might not want a life-changing event, but you will get one if you keep listening. And my life has changed. Richard's life has changed. Matt's life has changed. Tyler's life has changed. And everyone on our team's lives have changed because of shared practice. And everyone in our audience's life has changed because of shared practices. It's really that impactful. Before we get back to the episode, I wanted to take a minute and thank Practice by Numbers. Without their help and allowing us to set up the shared practices dashboard, a lot of what we do on Practice Underwater wouldn't be possible. I want to take a minute and highlight a clip from the episode that we did with Rohit, where we highlighted some of the metrics that really matter most.
You cannot look at them just by themselves. You have to look at a few other things together with it. But the most important number any practice right off the bat should look at is patient acceptance. And the difference between treatment acceptance and patient acceptance is treatment acceptance is the amount of dollars that we're accepting. For example, if you presented $100,000 worth of treatment, how much of that has been accepted, meaning scheduled or completed? Okay, so in this particular example, if 100,000 was presented, 55,000 was accepted, or either scheduled or completed. But the second part is 72%, which is the patient acceptance. What this means is that if you presented $100,000 worth of treatment to 100 patients, meaning $1,000 per patient, 72 of those patients scheduled some aspect of that treatment. Looking at patient acceptance is the absolute best way to go.
I hope you guys enjoyed that clip. If you guys are interested in trying out Practice by Numbers and looking at your practice through the Shared Practices dashboard, and there are many other dashboards, you can go to practicebynumbers.com and set up a free trial.
I will also say practice ownership is kind of like being a parent where you're never going to be ready. You just got to jump in. And sometimes you get it wrong the first time. I think all of us here who are practice owners, sorry, Tyler, have jumped into practice ownership thinking we knew what model of practice ownership we wanted. For me, I said in my fourth year of dental school, hey, I would love to own multiple practices and be the traveling specialist between those offices. And I have since realized, being in that role, that I don't love scaling and having multiple offices, and that I would rather work closely with a smaller team or have more one-on-one relationships with my team members. And I'm exploring other models. I'm looking at a different model of dentistry than what I went into initially. And same thing with George, and now same thing with Matt as well. So you don't have to have this perfectly figured out, but at least you should know what the menu is and the pros and the cons and which one you think you're gravitating to. And I don't think we did a good job of that. So I think that's something that we've covered in season 6 on growth. We've covered that in exploring different models, and then in practice underwater a lot better. So anything to add to that before we move on from season 1, which is taken a long time now, but it's been really good?
Yeah, I think we should just not rush through, but kind of give a quick synopsis of the seasons.
Okay.
So, want to start with season 2 then?
Yeah. So season 2 was, okay, I want to be a practice owner. How do I actually find, value, and buy a dental practice? A lot of people think, I can't find a practice. They just try and look on the broker's website. They assume they can't find one. They give up. And so they do a startup because they couldn't find the right practice. And there's lots of practice mailers, other ways of finding off-market deals. Valuing a practice. Once you found it, how do I know if this practice is good or a lemon? That's huge. We did deep dives that are way too deep for a podcast, but we wanted to get the information all out there on practice valuation. And then Tyler and Peyton have done that since on practice underwater. On TPO, the pursuit of ownership. So talk to us about kind of how much acquisition focused is that Wednesday segment that we now have on the pursuit of ownership.
Yeah. So, it's funny you mentioned pre-ownership underwater as well, which is another segment, which I'm sure we can detail. But, one aspect of that is that whenever people come on, they can sort of talk about their situations and whatever opportunity they've found, and we can kind of review that with them and just give some honest advice about what we think they should do based on what their mission and values and aspirations are. And a lot of times that does end up being an acquisition. So we're kind of walking through sort of in vivo acquisitions on the show a lot. But we also bring on experts every now and then, people involved in the transition team, dentists who have had success, dentists who haven't had success. And a lot of times that does have to do with acquisitions. On occasion, we do talk startups. We do talk partnerships every now and then. And we just talk about every facet that we think is relevant to that sort of pre-ownership journey that's really at the core of Shared Practices. And now it's just a part of what we do, but it's still something we really value. And we understand that we have a young audience, and there's always going to be some room for that.
And I will say this is where we started to hit our stride, was this type of content that you guys are now doing every Wednesday, which is, and the stuff that wasn't out there was, how do I actually do these steps and figure out which practice to buy? Because that just didn't exist in the podcasting space or in the online space well at all. And a lot of our listeners used season 2 to find and buy a dental practice and have done very well with that.
And I'll edit the TPO comments as well and say that, we had to come in and correct things, because as we became owners, we had a different perspective on pre-ownership. And so we like to consider TPO our, the pursuit of ownership, that ongoing segment, our ability to look at pre-ownership differently now that we're owners, and we can see it from both sides. I think it's added a great perspective. If you think of the 300 hours of content, I would roughly guess 200 hours of that are either related to, is practice ownership right for me? acquisitions, or startups. I think the whole pre-ownership segment is roughly, I don't know exactly, but I'd say roughly 200 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think another key aspect of that is that, we are teaching this in a sense, but we're also experiencing it. And as we go along, we're repeating things through iteration, and we're improving along the blueprint of the advice that we give. But it's always it's open to change as things happen in our lives and our careers, and as we learn more and as we interact with our audience and get more stories of their own ownership journeys. So it's really important that we kind of keep that segment alive and keep things rolling, and kind of letting people know what we learn as we go along.
Perfect. So can we move on to season 3 here? Season 3 will be quick.
Go for
We
it.
can skip it.
Well, we can skip season 3. I'm kidding. So the reason that joke is being made is because it's on startups, which you'll learn on the show. We try to be transparent and authentic. And so you will hear about the things we love emphatically, and you'll hear about the things we don't love emphatically. So season 3 is startups, and that's one of the things I don't love.
And I asked George a year into us working together, I was like, I need to step back even further and do even less with the show. I have to finish this residency. It's killing me. And so George ran with this season that he emphatically was not passionate about. And so I would say sometimes we lose people in season 3. So if you're either not into startups or you are into startups and we're asking for more, we're sorry.
I skipped over this as a listener. I stopped listening to season 3. Took a pause.
Yeah. So give yourself permission to just skip season 3. I will say that startups versus acquisition, and that's a topic we run up to a lot.
Our feelings have changed.
Our feelings have changed. We are more warm on startups and their potential, and done right, you can get very quickly up to speed with a startup, and you end up owing sometimes half. If you can build $1 million practice and you start that up and you can get there in the first 12 months, you then owe $500,000 versus buying, $1 million practice and owing $1 million. And there's some advantages to that, but you have to do everything right.
Yes.
And that's the hardest thing is people go into ownership with the most challenging aspect is doing a startup from scratch. And so you have the least tools to do the hardest thing, and people tend to screw it up. Or DIY and cheap out on certain things and not know how to balance all of the priorities because you have to do everything from scratch.
And the thing I'll add on that is, again, startups, if you're going to do one, do it in a way that'll pay off for you and makes it worth that initial runway of taking longer to get an ownership and all the things that come with that. And so I think we're starting to see that perspective as well. And again, we've changed a lot, and this is one of the things that I'm actually not as against as I was, 3.5 years ago when I started.
And I think it's also important to talk about, kind of what is our box and the sort of things that we really like to talk about and the things that we are emphatically passionate about. And there's a lot of other things that we don't really put a whole lot of emphasis on. There's niche type practices. There's a lot of specialty out there, people doing different things. There's startups, but what we kind of, gravitate towards is models of practice and ways about getting into practice that we feel are profitable, simple, and sustainable. Right. So that's something we're really big on. And we're not trying to teach you how to do this like really weird, crazy, eccentric practice. This is how dentistry we feel should be done in a way that's very befitting to owners and really extracts all the potential that comes out of even your everyday practice. And that kind of reconnects to the redefining average concept, right? We're trying to improve what is the average practice. And so we don't spend quite as much time on things that we consider to be somewhat eccentric or uncommon.
Awesome. Well, so let's move on to season 4 and 5 then. And I can kind of summarize those both at once. We wanted to now provide people who are in practice ownership with skills and tools to become successful practice owners. And we started at a place that I felt like hadn't been covered in depth in any dental podcast, which was case acceptance. So how do I present 10 grand of treatment without offending a patient and helping them make the decision to take care of their own health? How do I increase that percentage? How do I make it easier for my team to do that? And as a whole, as an office, to focus on case acceptance in a way that leads to great outcomes. And we're not talking about overdiagnosing. We're not talking about anything else. This is diagnosing accurately the work that needs to be done and helping patients get across the line and get that work done. So we did a whole season on that. And that's a topic that people are going to have to work on their entire careers. And I have a ton of room to grow in there. I think we've all found things that work for us. And Matt's, passionate about this and has future content coming around this as well. So felt like case acceptance is a great place to start, because if someone lacks case acceptance, so someone becomes a practice owner and they can't present treatment well, that is definitely going to be an impediment to them growing a practice. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, the quickest way to kind of grow on the doctor side of a dental office is through case acceptance. It's not through adding procedures or, getting complicated. It's talking to people, it's connecting to humans, it's, ethically persuading them to go forward with treatment that is needed will make the biggest difference in pretty much any dental office around the country. And it's a super sustainable skill that can really pay dividends for you, years and years into your career.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of a head game. Like if you come to the table with like a bunch of stuff around money, around what people can afford, and what's, there's a lot internal to this, and not only for yourself, but also for your teammates. So your team members. So, your assistant, your hygienist, if they think this is really expensive treatment and they're afraid to present it to patients, then they're not going to do it well. And so there's a lot of coaching and work to be done in that space. And a lot of it kind of feels ooey gooey, but it matters. It matters quite a bit. Anything to add, George, before we move on to season 5 now?
No, I just want to reiterate what Matt said, right? Tyler talked about PSS, right? Profitable, simple, sustainable. Watch that in action. The most effective, simple way to grow your practice is by talking to people effectively. That's simple, that's sustainable, and that's the most profitable single thing that can be done to grow a practice from 1 month to the next. And so, that's watching our philosophy in action.
And if I may, I would say that's probably the most doctor side thing that we do in terms of like telling people how to be a dentist. We don't really talk about how you treat patients or how you diagnose necessarily. This is more about whatever it is that you think you need to do as a dentist. We're helping you, actually get that on the other end and actually affect your bottom line and actually do the dentistry and have patients accepting treatment. And we never really go so far into, how to be a dentist. I think we always kind of meet people halfway with whatever type of dentist they really are, clinically speaking.
Absolutely. And we made that conscious choice. Like we are not a clinical podcast, right, and we will never be a clinical podcast, and we're okay with that. And we hope you're okay with that. So the next season was another ooey gooey season. And this is where I like to take these deep dives on, let's go into a topic that's difficult to explore. It's difficult to extract results out of, but really matters. And that's leadership, culture, and change. So how do you diagnose yourself as a leader? Am I a bad leader? Where can I improve? How can I get feedback from my team in a sustainable way and doing a 360 with my team? How can I become better at handling conflict, about holding people accountable? These are the kind of things that if you can't handle conflict, you can't hold people accountable, your practice will suffer. There will be conversations that you avoid that hold you and your practice back because you are afraid to step up to the plate. And creating a culture in your office where team members are able to handle conflict among themselves, they're able to bring things up, bring up ideas, bring up problems without fear of losing their job, of retribution from the team. That's hard to do. We're humans. We get offended. We read into things. We come with assumptions, and all of that can be untangled and worked on, so that not only are you a better leader, your teammates, your team members are better at having these difficult conversations, on creating a culture, living up to this vision that you've created for practice. But it's something that if you don't focus on it, it will not happen. And is another area where we feel we have a lot to offer in terms of working directly with doctors on their leadership, on their ability to have these difficult conversations. And it's a lot of fun because I had my dad on, who has done crucial conversations, has trained Fortune 500 companies on all this kind of stuff, on leadership work. And across the board, everyone was like, you know what, your dad's actually a whole lot better at all of this than you are. And I'm like, thanks, guys. Thanks.
I can attest to Murray. He has coached me as well. And, great time with him. And, I think that, again, like the soft skills, right? Your ability to communicate with patients, and then your ability to communicate with your team. We think maybe patience is very tangible and you can see the benefit of that. But we hope to show you the benefit of growing your leadership and how much that can transform your life and your practice. And that's season 5.
Awesome. Well, and before we get to season 6, let's introduce Practice Underwater and how that evolved. So this came from a conversation I had with Jamie Amos at some event. I can't remember which one. And he was like, man, I have all these people who come to me all the time who are like, I need help with my practice. Like, I am struggling. And he's like, I don't have anywhere to send them. And that triggered some conversations between George and I of like, man, it'd be really cool if we had a podcast where we could basically x-ray a practice and then create an anonymous coaching session where we change their name, change their voice, and look at these practices. And George and Matt, you two took this idea and ran with it and created what's now our most popular and I think our most impactful segment of the podcast. So talk to us about that.
So when Matt and I were designing shared practices coaching, we had 2 tenets that we wanted to stand by. So Matt, life coaching program, really big on mindset of the owner. And so we had mindset and then we had metrics. And, I brought analytics and, you wonder how, I said it earlier, I have a GP office. We do literally nothing crazy. It's the most regular dental office. And a new grad took that and more than doubled it in 2 years. It's this concept called analytics-based practice management of using metrics to run an office and pulling the right levers at the right times. And so we married these 2 concepts. And we have our philosophy now, the shared practices philosophy that we've sort of ironed out on Practice Underwater. And so we get this guest on and we change their name. We don't say their location. We change their voice, but we show all of their numbers. And so you can download this dentist's numbers to see their production, their collections, their accounts receivable, all of their different key performance indicators. And you can digest these practices with us to see the paths to growth. And over time, we've really been able to refine our philosophy in Practice Underwater. You can watch our transformation of refining our own philosophy through, we've been doing it now for 16 months, Practice Underwater. And, it's a lot of episodes and a lot of practices that we've looked at. And you can hear the change in our philosophy over the last 16 months on air.
And the key to it all is the anonymity of it, that they can come on, no one knows who they are, they share their numbers, they don't give any of their details. They're able to be their most vulnerable self about what's really going on in their practice. And it's cool, George and I, as the kind of unbiased observer, we're able to point out a lot of the ways that they're getting in their own way and don't even know it. So our first part of the episode, they're usually 2-part episodes with the guests. First part is really big on mindset, on discovering where they are, like, hindering themselves. And the second part being more of that analytics based. Okay, now we kind of have worked through some of those issues. Let's make an action plan based on what your numbers say is what are the next, tangible moves you're able to make to move the practice forward.
And the thing that we've learned throughout all of these guests is you look at a practice and we call it Practice Underwater and you think they're all going bankrupt. It's actually the opposite. These are people who listen to our show. We're redefining average. We're getting these great offices, but when you listen to them and they change their voice and we change their name and they're able to get vulnerable, you'll see that somebody who you might look at and say, man, their practice is doing $2 million a year, they've got it all together. You'll find out, like our guest Ace doesn't have an office manager and the staff's a total, there's not a whole lot going on that's organized. And so you'll see and they are underwater, even though financially they may not be. There's a lot of other issues that we uncover. So the name actually kind of held up, even though we didn't get the type of guests we were expecting. We were hoping to get those bankrupt practices. We only had 2 or 3 of those, but the other ones are financially successful, but still need a lot of help.
The other thing I'll say is that I feel like this segment is where we refined not only our philosophy on metrics and mindset, but also I thought coming into shared practices, this almost had a few other names. I can't even remember them. One of them was like the Systems Academy. Like I wanted to figure out what are the best systems. Like you figure out the best way to do your schedule, the best way to do your calls and your recall and your supply. And if you just plug in all the right systems, your practice is going to be successful. And I feel like that's actually what a lot of dentists feel like is like, oh, I just need a better system. And then everything would be good. And there are people out there who that's what they teach. Here's a book full of systems and that's going to solve your problems. When in fact, it's not the what, or it's not the how to do these things. It's the what things to do. So talk to us about that, George.
So we have this concept called the who, what, how hierarchy. And we want to start with the bottom, which is who. That's you, the owner. And we really our philosophy begins with the mindset of the dentist who owns a practice or the mindset of the pre-owner. Are you thinking clearly? Do you have the right mindset for growth? Then if that's all in place, then we look at your analytics. What? That's why we start part 1 of Practice Underwater with vision, with the owner. We check out how their mindset is. And then part 2 is, those metrics on what to do to get your practice to where you want to go now that we've ironed out the ownership mindset and their goals and all that. And that's what. And then that last step is what everyone else always talks about, how to do it. So we still believe in the systems and doing things the way that everyone else talks about, but it doesn't matter how you do something if you're not doing the right thing. And so what to do, you need to know that before you know how to do it. And you need to have the right mindset so you can see clearly what to do. So it starts with who, then what, then how.
And a wrinkle onto that, like what to do, but what to do when?
Yeah.
Like what is the logical sequence of events that's going to push your practice, in the right direction? And how to diagnose that through our analytics is something that really cool that we offer on this part of our show.
I think the place where this becomes the most obvious is where someone has bought a great practice and they're now an owner and they're in their first 3 months of ownership. And there's this sense of like, oh crap, there's a lot of things wrong with this practice. And there's a lot of things I could do. And there's a lot of systems in this practice that are like decent, but not great. And so there's this, where do I start? What is the bottleneck? And that's the concept that the metrics-based really reveals is what is the thing that is holding your practice back, and that if you work on that thing, you're going to get results. And then there's going to be another bottleneck, and then there's going to be another bottleneck. But you can end up getting lost chasing all of these accessory systems and never addressing the bottleneck and not seeing growth. And having perspective, having someone else look at your practice, look at your metrics, that's where you can figure that out. Because when you're in it, it's really hard to see what the bottleneck is.
And I thought you were going to say something else, but for me, Practice Underwater is where we made the transition from we were guys exploring ideas to we were a company that had a way of doing things that we believe in is better than anything else. And now we're talking about it. And I feel like there's an inflection point somewhere in our podcast from exploration to discovery. And that happened at somewhere along Practice Underwater's trajectory or arc. And, now we have a director of coaching, Suzanne Rassi, who was an industry person and came on our side, believes in our philosophy, and is executing it with our whole coaching team of former office managers. And so it really, Practice Underwater is where that progression started from, exploration to discovery to innovative company. And I really think that all happened on air.
And if someone's listening to this and they're like, man, I kind of want that. There's a way that you can go on our website and sign up for a discovery call, get on the wait list to have your practice looked at. And it's a really cool way for us to interact with our audience in a way that is very intimate, and you have to be ready for feedback, whether or not you're looking for feedback in all of these areas. There might be areas that you don't realize, oh crap, I had a blind spot here. I'm not very good at this. Is there ever pushback from people that are like not ready to hear what you guys have to tell them?
All the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you got people for the first half hour, they try to defend themselves. They're like, yeah, it's because of blank, and miss their excuses, or we call Mr. Right Answer some, but yeah, we'll get through that quick. We're trained, Matt and I, on getting through that. We get through the crap and we get to the source.
Nice.
So
so now
I kind of wanted to wrap up with, if we all sort of, I think one thing that if you've never listened to our podcast before, and this is your first time listening to us, you might not fully understand the impact that we've had on our audience's lives. And I don't think we can communicate that on air, but I think it'd be great if we at some point touched on the impact shared practice had on our own lives personally, because, there's a reason we talk the way we do and believe in what we do to the level that we do. And it's because of the impact it's had on our own lives. And we're just sharing our experiences. So if anyone wants to start, I think it'd be great if we went around and talked about that.
Let's see, Tyler, we're going to volunteer. You got it.
I think Tyler has the one that's the most in the works and kind of nebulous, being that I'm, of course, still in school and we're trying to figure out exactly what happens after school. But just to kind of catch people up, I mean, when I found shared practices, I was working in a dental lab. I was a digital lab technician, and I was just trying to get into school. And I didn't know exactly what I was doing with my life, to be perfectly honest. I kind of got hamstrung or shoehorned into being a dentist. I wasn't entirely sure what it was all about. And I was having a hard time really visualizing myself in that role as a dentist. And I was, just sort of looking for answers and looking for role models. And I was really fortunate to find that in the Shared Practices podcast. And, George and Richard both were idols for me for a time. And now then they eventually became role models, and now they're very close friends of mine. And I think that's, personally a huge impact that they've had. But professionally speaking, I mean, there is absolutely no way, looking ahead at my next, year or 5 years, possibly 10 years, that something of that nature could have been manifested on my own. And I think that that's really what's so powerful about this, is that we synergistically create futures for ourselves that would have never been possible were we just trying to do it in isolation, in a vacuum. And I think that's what we offer to all of our audiences, to come on board and see what's really possible. And that's oftentimes not at all what they expected.
Awesome. Well, Matt, let's have you go.
Follow that, Matt.
It's funny when you asked that question, George. I went back to a conversation I had years ago when I was a D1. I haven't thought about this in like forever. My friend group and I were talking like who's going to make the most money out of our friend group kind of in their careers. And my name got brought up like, yo, you're a dentist. Like you're going to make a lot of money. And I immediately was like, no, I'm going to have like a ton of debt. Like you have no idea. Like I'm not getting out of this. And that was 2017, I started listening to the Shared Practice podcast and found the route to get out of it. And fast forwarding, we're in the Macarino money realm and all that stuff. But it just provided so much knowledge and opportunity and possibility in my own dental career that, I couldn't have fathomed back before I listened. And then, now I'm down from a solo practicing dentist to 1.5 days a week, because I'm more full-time COO of Shared Practices, and I consider myself entrepreneur first, dentist second. And that is something that has been the biggest gift in my own life. So I really owe everything to the podcast and this company.
Well, thanks, man. So I'll go and I'll let you wrap up, George. I really wanted this to be helpful, like the whole time. Like that's been one of my things, was I want to be able to help other dentists via this podcast. And ironically, I've benefited just as much, if not more. I would never have been able to buy 3 dental practices in the Army if it weren't for Shared Practices, for the knowledge, the connections. And even though I'm actually leaving those practices, and we just had an episode about that recently, it's been an incredible experience. I've learned a ton. I've worked with amazing people, amazing partners. And none of that would have been possible without Shared Practices. I also am trying to close on another transaction before I get out of the Army. I can't really talk about that yet, but all of these things, there's a concept in a book called So Good They Can't Ignore You. I can't remember the author's name right now, but he talks about the adjacent possible and how really in life we end up making a series of decisions around adjacent possible. So you kind of reach the epitome of what you could be doing in your current situation, and then something will come up next that you didn't really think was possible, and you move into that next space, and then you move into that next space. And those adjacent possible opportunities, if you keep maximizing each one of those, you'll end up in a place that you never thought possible in the first place. And that very much is where I feel like I currently am. And part of that too is I remember hearing there was a mastermind group in dentistry with David Malloy, Graham Dursley, some other people. And I remember thinking like, man, it sounds like I kind of missed the boat on that mastermind, because it was like a certain generation of dentists that all were entrepreneurial focused, great people, a lot of fun to be around. I was like, I want to create that. I want to have that for our generation of dentists. And Shared Practices has very much become that, literally, in terms of our mastermind and the people we have in our mastermind. And then in terms of our team, the George, Matt, Tyler, everyone else that's involved in Shared Practices are some of our closest friends and relationships. And then we get to share that with other dentists in our mastermind and in our coaching. And that's been so rewarding, and honestly is way more satisfying than I ever thought was possible. So, and also the fact that George and Matt and everyone has built this while I'm still in the Army. In my acquisitions, my 3 acquisitions, and in Shared Practices, I really can't take that much credit. It's like, if you build it, they will come. Identified the practices, partners did all the hard work, built the idea of Shared Practices, and then you all have done all the hard work while I've wrapped up my Army commitment. So I am so grateful that you guys are part of our team and part of my life, and it's been a blast. So George, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, to say that shared practices changed my life would be about the biggest understatement I could ever say. I came on as a third-year dental student, super confused, just wanted to be a solo dentist. And I think that when you have that community and those people around you, the flow of ideas is so much faster. And what you talked about, like adjacent possibility, looking at someone else do something then made me feel like, oh, I can do that thing. And now we've done things that very few have. And we can get back on air and to our audience, we can talk about like, hey, look at what we did, and the whole lesson is we're all sharing the things that we were able to do. And the fact that we were able to accomplish them as a collective community have accomplished a lot of really rare things. Now they seem ordinary to the rest of us so that we can all follow suit. And it's this constant act of, us elevating, each other. And on a personal note, representing this company as our CEO, I view myself as the tip of the iceberg, and it's the biggest honor and the biggest burden, not because of the role itself. It's because of the people that, we represent. It's our team, are some of the most impressive people I know. And to be the leader of that team, of, the talent we have on our roster at every position, there is nothing like it. And I don't think there ever will be. So, it couldn't be a greater honor to be in this role.
Well, this has been amazing. And hopefully if you're not, hadn't heard of shared practices before now, or maybe heard of us and kind of wrote us off as like, oh, a couple of young dentists doing something weird. Hopefully you can see that there's some amazing things that have happened out of shared practices, which used to be a podcast trying to be a company, is now very much a company that happens to have a podcast. If you're interested in becoming more part of our community, join our Facebook group, Shared Practices, listen to the podcast. Hopefully you can figure out where to put yourself in terms of the seasons at this point. And if you're looking for help, reach out. Like, we are here. We've got support. We've got mastermind. We've got coaching. We have the ability to help you customize what you need to do to move to the next level and to figure out what those bottlenecks are and move forward. So any last words here before we wrap it up?
No, I think that was great.
That was great. And if you want more info on any of our offerings, sharepractices.com, you can explore them all. They're all there. And this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was great.
Awesome. Well, we will talk to you guys next time. Thanks for tuning in on the Shared Practices podcast.